We're back again in Vrindavan at Radhakund with an eager desire to receive Radharani's mercy and the mercy of the Vaishnavas who are receiving Radharani's mercy is the best way to get Radharani's mercy. So we're visiting places, temples and other places where great Vaishnavas to take advantage of this sacred place of Radhakund kept their residence or bhajan kutirs or place of worship, and we're spending time with these individuals, honoring them as they honor Srimati Radharani. Here's our map, and it's indicating some of the places we'll be visiting. Those little blue lines are showing where we're going today. Number 4, up in the upper section, center, this is the Radha Damodar temple there's actually 2 Radha Damodar temples in Radhakund, and then another over on the far right side by Shyamakund. We'll visit both places. This is the place where Jiva Goswami spent time and did worship and glorified Srimati Radharani in this way. Those other 2 that are up in that upper section, we visited yesterday. That's the temple of Shyamananda and the Bhajan Kutir of Srinivas. Those were around the same area. Now then we'll go down to Janava Devi, that's number 6, that little section that's protruding into the Radhakund area. And just above 6 is number 7. That's where the Gopinath deity is. And then number 8 is where the Samadhi of Raghunath Das Goswami is. So those are the 4 places we'll be visiting this time. And here's a different map from a different angle. And you look at the lower right, you'll see a little blue dot. And that's the Radha Damodar temple, one of the 2 at Radhakund. And very near is where we visited yesterday, the Radha Shyamasundar temple of Shyamananda and the Bhajan Kutir of Srinivas Acharya. So let's begin. We'll visit Can you hear music? It's a nice background music. All right, very good. Okay, so that background is the song by Srinivas Acharya glorifying the 6 Goswamis. Bande Rupa Sanatano Sri Jiva Gopala. So the 6 Goswamis are glorified in that Ashtaka. And the deity of Radha Damodar is the deity of Jiva Goswami. Now, the original, we'll see photos of the original Radha Damodar. They're now in Jaipur. So the original's not on the altar here, but here's the altar. And here's a closer look. Jiva Goswami was formerly Vilasa Manjari Gopi. Vilasa Manjari was an assistant of Sri Rupa Manjari, and Vilasa Manjari Gopi is on the altar, and next to them is Radha Damodar. And of course you recognize below that is Jagannath, and below that are Govardhan Shilas. So this is the altar at this nice temple at Radhakund. Here's the deity of Radha Damodar, what's called the Pratibhu deity. And you can't see the entire altar, but at the bottom of the screen you can see how many deities are on the altar. There's Radha Vrindavan Chandra, the deities of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and they're really big. We'll see later another photo that there's 4 sets of deities. So Krishnadas Kaviraj deities, and then at the center, around that green backdrop, kind of effulgence, is the Radha Damodar Pratibhu deities of Jiva Goswami, and to Damodar's right, or to our left, that's Lalita. And then next to them are Jayadev Goswami's Sri Radha Madhava deities, which means Jayadev Goswami also spent some time in Vrindavan. The original Radha Madhava deities are in Jaipur. Nice place. And then at the far right, we'll see the full altar, but it's hard to get a good picture up close like this, is Bhugarbha Goswami. And he has a nice name, Chanchi Kaniya, Radha Chanchi Kaniya. So Bhugarbha Goswami, as well as Lokanath Goswami, were both sent before Lord Chaitanya took sannyas. He sent both of them to go to Vrindavan and establish a place where he could associate with them. Except when he took sannyas, he didn't go to Vrindavan. That was his intention. And his mother, he went to Puri instead. So, but Bhugarbha Goswami, his samadhi is in that same courtyard of the Radha Damodar temple. So apparently he, Bhugarbha, spent some time in the Radha Damodar temple area, and he was his deities are on this altar. So take a close look at the face of Radha Damodar. Here's a close-up of the face of Radha Damodar, and here is during the Chandan Yatra time. The original deity of Radha Damodar is pictured here. Very beautiful deity. It is said that Rupa Goswami, along with accepting Jiva Goswami, we'll hear further about this, as his Diksha disciple, and as well Shiksha disciple, he, with his own hand, Rupa Goswami, made these deities. Here's a close-up. The features are very beautiful. There are many significant contributions made by Jiva Goswami. I'll just list them and then we'll go through as we go forward. We'll start with the deity worship. Each of the 6 Goswamis, well, we don't know so much about Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, but the other 5 all had some very deep absorption in deity worship. And Jiva Goswami, although that's not what he's primarily known for, he was very deeply absorbed in deity worship. It's described, one of his unique characteristics, along with the intensity of his devotion was that he was very practical. I mean, in ways that those who are highly spiritual are not considered to be. He did something that was unprecedented. He did a number of things that were unprecedented, but he made a personal will. It wasn't done by sadhus. He made a vision prior to his departure. And one of the details in his will was who would look after the deity of Radha Damodar in his physical absence. So some of these documents are found in the Jiva Institute. There's a place where there's many, many, many documents. Writing with his original handwriting, which we'll see. They're there at that place. Documents where he established deeds. Traditionally, this wasn't done. Traditionally, just the deity becomes the owner. But he established a document, the ownership, thinking after his departure, what's going to happen? So he thought about those things. In the excavation of the Radhakund, which is where we're visiting, he made a deed that the place, because there's no deity there, the place was put in the name of Raghunath Das Goswami. And then what would happen after the departure of Raghunath Das Goswami? He very practical, thinking of the future protection of the property. I mean, Prabhupada followed the same standard, but Jiva Goswami set the standard. He wanted to preserve the legacy of the writings of the Goswamis, and so he enlisted a number of scribes that would make hand copies of all the writings of the Goswamis and established a library. Now, sadhus don't normally do those things, but he's certainly a sadhu, but he was thinking in very practical terms of preserving the legacy of the Goswamis. One of the places when we visit the samadhi of Sanatana Goswami is way over in the corner. One of the samadhis is a Grantha samadhi. Grantha means scripture. So Jiva Goswami was entrusted with the writings of the other Goswamis, and some of them he found, or he determined in his own manner, that they were not for public reading to whatever it was, esoteric or something. And so he placed them in samadhi for the protection and well-being of, because people get their hand on something and don't know what they're doing and misuse it. So he made that decision. And we'll never know what was in those literatures because they're in samadhi. His writing is what he's most known for. From his early days, we'll hear shortly. But in his writings, he wrote 25 books. But, Bhaktivinoda wrote 100 books, but his 25 books are very, very substantial. 400,000 verses. So 400,000, just do the math. And how many verses are there in Srimad Bhagavatam? 18,000. How many verses are there in Bhagavad Gita? 700. How many verses are there in Mahabharata? 100,000. So it's like he wrote 3 Mahabharats, 6 or 7 Srimad Bhagavatams, 5 or 6 Bhagavad Gitas, and some other books. And the range was broad. Madhava Mahotsav is a story. The Sandarbhas is rigor. And, he loved Srimad Bhagavatam. He learned Srimad Bhagavatam from Rupa Goswami. And and others we'll hear as we go forward. And he has multiple commentaries. Multiple. I mean, some is the verse-by-verse kind. That's Krama Sandarbha. Another is topic-by-topic kind in the Sandarbhas. And that's his, perhaps his most well-known and revered writing. He wrote Gopal Champu, which is essentially a retelling of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. He wrote a commentary on Sanatana Goswami's 10th canto, Sajjana, what was it? Toshani, Vaishnava Toshani. Sanatana Goswami wanted him to proofread it. And in the course of proofreading it, he wrote a commentary. He wrote a commentary on Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, his primary work. He wrote a commentary on its sequel, Ujjvala Nilamani. And, you know, his writing is very high, and it's set the standard for conclusive understanding of the Goswami's writings, which were the conclusive understanding of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. He was a very powerful personality. And he was respected by everyone, rightly so. And he understood, he was the first to engage in book distribution with the writings of the Goswamis, how to make it available. So he made a plan, and that he taught the people who would carry those literatures. He gave them the literatures and sent them off to distribute those literatures or to make copies. We'll hear shortly something how Janava had a role in all of this. But there's the exaltedness and the significance of Jiva Goswami. It can't be underestimated or sufficiently described. Commonly, after a great personality, the next generation or the generation after the next generation, things start to dissipate. It's just how things work in the world, the history of world religion. That the Goswamis, Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami were there to maintain Lord Chaitanya's teachings. Fantastic. And then their nephew, Jiva Goswami, next in line. Fantastic. And he trained the people who would be next in line. Fantastic. So the preeminence and purity and undistorted presentation of Lord Chaitanya's teachings, which could easily have gone in all kinds of strange ways because of the exceptional manner of his presentation, could easily have gone in strange directions. But Jiva Goswami preserved it. He understood his function, and he did it excellently well. And our line of disciplic succession, with this emphasis on book distribution, follows Jiva Goswami. So his presence is outstanding. Yeah, I want to say one other thing. Of these 400,000 verses that he wrote, they're very deep. Of course, some of them are like Madhava Mahotsav is lighter because it's a narration, it's a pastime description. But for example, the Sandarbhas, my understanding of Radhika Raman's PhD thesis was 3 verses from Paramatma Sandarbha. And it was, he researched other things, but it's very deep, very, very deep. And Jiva Goswami knew how to present something very deep in a concise manner to a well-educated audience. One of the things that makes the Sandarbhas a little challenging is he was writing for a certain audience, and the audience that he was writing for were highly learned, scholarly people of his time. So it's not even that the concepts were too lofty, but he wrote in such a way that it was understood. When he said a few lines, they would know the whole verse because they're so well read. And that was who his audience was. So to make the Sandarbhas accessible to, not so scholarly people of today, and I happen to know in our Gaudiya Vaishnav line, there's rigorous differences of opinion and discussion, you could say debate, going on over the what is the right way to understand. It's called hermeneutics. What is the right way to understand certain passages of Jiva Goswami's writings? Because they're foundational. And one can look at it through this lens and one can look at it through that lens and come up with different understandings. But that's the rock foundation. So rather than going into the way that scholars look at these things, it's the gold standard for us for understanding Lord Chaitanya's teachings, because he understands Rupa Goswami's teachings and explained them in his commentaries. So he's a very important person. Very important person. And I've said this many times. He's one of my heroes. Jiva Goswami. So let's go a little bit into his life, part of which was spent at Radhakund, part of which was spent in Vrindavan town, and other things. So he was the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan, which means his father was their brother. His father was Ballabha. Rupa and Sanatan had the brother. He along with his 2 brothers, that is Ballabha along with Rupa and Sanatan, they all 3 were engaged in service to the Nawab Hussain Shah. How they were involved in that situation was Nawab was smart. He wanted to be able to rule where the people who he was ruling would accept his rule. So he engaged those 3 because the people accepted them. Rupas and Sanatan and Ballabha were respected by everybody. Whatever they said, they would do. So at least this is the understanding that I have, Nawab recognized that, and he met with them and gave them a choice, A or B. A, assist me in my government. Or B, if you don't, I'll torture and torment all the Vaishnavas in the whole kingdom. Think about it. So they engaged in service to Nawab, and the people were very happy to be in direct contact with Sanatan, Rupa, and Ballabha. So Ballabha was given a title So were Rupa and Sanatan. His was Malik. I don't know exactly what that means, but Malik. And Lord Chaitanya gave him a nickname. I mean, his actual name was Vallabha, but he called him Anupam. So it became Anupam Malik. And he was Jiva's father. So they were from a highly educated and highly born family. Saraswat Brahmin family. There's a lineage that's detailed in one book, in a couple of books. Bhakti Ratnakar is one that gives like the number of years of ancestry from Karnataka, where they hailed. And there was some dispute in the family, and so they moved from this area to that area, and then another area, and then another area, and eventually settled in Ramakeli in the northern part of India. And that happened to be where Nawab Hussain Shah had his kingdom, and that's how they got involved in the kingdom. But they were Vaishnavas, and they were highly learned, and they were given a nice maintenance arrangement by Nawab for all of the service, in which they used for creating a miniature Vrindavan. In the land that they had, they didn't make big buildings. They made it a Govardhan Hill and a Jamuna River, and they were Vaishnavas, and they were conducting Vaishnav topics, as their what they'd like to do. And the king allowed them to do that because they held the citizens in check. However, in course of time, they became a little anxious to leave their government service because it was abominable doing this materialistic activity and being engaged in Nawab's service. So they heard of Lord Chaitanya, who was by that time living in Puri, and they wrote letters to him, sent through messengers, trusted messengers, because it was highly confidential. If they tell the Nawab, we want to leave your service and go join Lord Chaitanya, they could be in trouble, though Lord Chaitanya could be in trouble. Lord Chaitanya didn't send answers till one time later, a cryptic message said, don't be restless. You should conduct yourself like a woman that has a paramour. I mean, this isn't the word for word, but a woman that has a paramour, she does her household duties very nicely so that her husband won't suspect she has a paramour. But all the while, she's contemplating, when will that opportunity come again where I can be with my paramour? So do like that, and one day Krishna will make arrangements for you to no longer have that obligation. It was indirect, it wasn't so explicit, because messages could get intercepted, but they understood what he was saying. So they carried on. And based upon that letter exchange, of course, this is Leela, they're eternal associates of Lord Chaitanya, each of them. He came to, on the pretext of going to Vrindavan, he made a little detour. He didn't go straight to Vrindavan. He went to Navadvip and visited devotees in Navadvip, and then he went to Ramakeli, or near Ramakeli, where the king was. And there was a whole scene, because there were thousands of people with him. And Nawab was, a politician, and he wanted to know. I heard that there are these very elevated persons over here. Tell me about them. They knew he's a wicked man, so they said, oh, he's just a sentimentalist and he's got a lot of followers and don't think anything of it. Let it leave your mind, because at any time he could do anything wild. Lord Chaitanya met with Rupa and Sanatan at night, and Anupam, and there's some indication, there's differences of opinion, and some say that we don't know, and some say no, and some say yes. That Jiva Goswami at that time was a small child, like an infant, and Lord Chaitanya placed his feet on his head, or in some way gave his mercy to Jiva Goswami. Some speak like that or write like that. And then the history was, Sanatan said, don't stay here. The Nawab could do anything at any time. We certainly want your association, and we'll make some arrangement to get your association. But you should return. Don't go to Vrindavan with so many thousands of people. It's not the way to go to the holy place. And he's giving advice to Lord Chaitanya, which was really amazing. And Lord Chaitanya considered it and thought he was right, and so he returned to Puri. And shortly thereafter, his two uncles left their service. Rupa and Anupam immediately left. Sanatan Goswami was the prime minister, and he stayed behind. We know that story we'll hear later when we spend time at Sanatan Goswami's place in Madan Mohan temple there. But Rupa and Anupam went and met with Lord Chaitanya, and then later they were going to be going to Puri, where Lord Chaitanya, after his visit to Vrindavan, was heading for Puri. But Anupam died in their journey going to Puri, along the banks of the river Ganges, close to Gangasagara, where the Ganges flows into the ocean. So when that news came to Jiva, he was already in the writings. Bhakti Ratnakar describe when his two uncles left their government service, he became very agitated to be with Lord Chaitanya. But he was a small boy, and he was the only male. It was just his mother remaining. So he stayed with his mother for solace and peace of mind, that at least my son is here. But when he got news that his father had left his body, and he became very, very restless. And that there's some childhood things that I should say. He had he liked deity worship, so he had little Krishna Balaram deities. He had Krishna Balaram deities, and he didn't play with his friends. He was with his deities. They would, because little boys will be boys, they did activities, but it was all Krishna-centered. And he just wasn't interested in the non-Krishna-centered activities. Just didn't engage with them, but he engaged with his deities, making ornaments and jewels and making offerings, and then distributing the prasad to his friends. And there's this description that one time he had a dream in which his deities appeared in his dream, and then suddenly his deities changed to Gornatai, and they were dancing. And then suddenly they changed back to Krishna Balaram, and his dream broke. I want to read, it's very nice. Yeah. Even while engaged in his studies, so he's super scholar. So his studies were such, his teachers understood. This is a remarkable boy. We've never had a student like him. Surely he's going to be a saint of some kind. And even while he was engaged in his studies, his thoughts were always with his Krishna Balaram deities. Once he saw in a dream his Krishna Balaram had taken the forms of Nitai Gauranga and were dancing, giving him the dust of the lotus feet. The two lords then disappeared. This is from Bhakti Ratnakar. In a dream, Jiva had a vision of Mahaprabhu dancing in the midst of Sankirtan. And Mahaprabhu approached Jiva Goswami and said, I'm entrusting you under the care of Sri Nityananda Prabhu. You are his property. And then Nityananda said to Jiva, you always worship Lord Gauranga as the Lord of your life. And his dream ended. So he's getting these, his devotion was being nourished by intervention in the form of dreams. And when he understood that his father had departed, he wanted to go be with his uncles, and his uncles were in Vrindavan. But so it was difficult for him to leave his mother and everything. They had vast wealth, but he wasn't interested in wealth. He was interested in being with his uncles. And so he got permission to go to pacify his restless heart, to go to Navadvip. He wanted to see the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And so it's a journey to go from Ramakeli to Navadvip, but he made it. And when he got there, he's a young man. He came to know that Nityananda Prabhu was residing at the home of Srivas. So he went to the home of Srivas. Nityananda and Srivas and the other Vaishnavas who were still living there received him very nicely, very affectionately. In Bhakti Ratnakar it says, he asked him, Are you the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan? As soon as he just showed up at the door. No, he's omniscient. And they, along with receiving them nicely, Lord Nityananda took him to the place where Mother Sachi was residing, and along with her servant. And Mother Sachi recognized the young boy as being a saintly person. She showered her affection upon him. So he's getting the blessings of elevated personalities. It's important in spiritual life. And Nityananda, at Jiva's request, gave him a tour of the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. It's a celebrated event. It's written about by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in detail. Navadvip Parikrama. And here's some paintings. Lord Nityananda revealed to him this Adbhuta Mandir understanding. It's directly in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's writings. So here's 3 paintings. There's one, there's another, there's a Pushkar painting, and then a more modern one that shows our Temple of Vedic Planetarium. And he gave his mercy to Jiva Goswami, and profusely, because his heart was troubled by the loss of his father and having no association with his 2 uncles. And at the end, Lord Nityananda significantly gave him his blessings to reside in Vrindavan. This happens several times, where residence in Vrindavan is granted by the mercy of Lord Nityananda. Before he went to Vrindavan to be with his 2 uncles, Nityananda sent him to Benares to study under Madhusudana Vachaspati. Madhusudana Vachaspati was a student of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had received an understanding from Lord Chaitanya everything about Srimad Bhagavatam, who then taught Madhusudana Vachaspati, who then taught Jiva Goswami. So he's getting Lord Chaitanya's explanation of Srimad Bhagavatam in disciplic succession from Madhusudana Vachaspati. And it's said that Benares is not a place for Vaishnavas, generally speaking. But Madhusudana Vachaspati was a very special person. He was a very elevated Vaishnav, and he understood the non-Vaishnava explanations of Vedanta. It's called the 6 darshans, sad-darshans. So before he went to Vrindavan, for about a year and a half, something like that, he studied under Madhusudana Vachaspati, something that generally takes people many, many years, and still don't understand it. He understood within a short time. So before he went to Vrindavan, he had Lord Chaitanya's understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam and a thorough grasp of the teachings, the non-Vaishnava renderings of Vedanta. It's a detail, but it's nice to appreciate details sometimes. I heard a recording of Radhika Raman describing what it was like doing his PhD work. And he came across some repetitive nomenclature, use of language used by Jiva Goswami, and he became curious why this particular nomenclature. I can't remember. It's a certain tense of use of language, and Jiva Goswami would use it again and again. So there was a friend that he was studying, doing his PhD work, and he asked him, he said, "Oh, that's easy. That's from Nyaya. And there's a certain use of language in Nyaya where so that Jiva Goswami used this term means he was very familiar with Nyaya, and he just included it because it was useful in his writing of the Sandarbhas." My point is this: before he reached Vrindavan, he was well schooled in non-Vaishnava ideology and how to refute it from Madhusudana Vachaspati, who learned it from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who learned it from Lord Chaitanya. That's before he went to Vrindavan. And when he went to Vrindavan, he was in bliss, and they were expecting him. They, Rupa, Sanatan, Gopal Bhatta, and the other great personalities. Raghunath Das was already residing at Radhakund and so forth. And they received him with like their younger brother. I mean, he's the son of their brother, but they treated him like their younger brother or the nephew. And right away, the description goes that Jiva Goswami wanted, the eldest was Sanatan, so he requested Sanatan to give him Diksha. Sanatan deferred to Rupa Goswami, let him give you Diksha. And Rupa Goswami didn't right away give him Diksha, but he trained him in the mood of a disciple. The mood of a disciple is doing very simple service. So that's what Jiva Goswami did for quite some time. He's this highly learned personality, highly elevated personality, doing menial service for Rupa and Sanatan in particular, assisting in their making offerings for their deities and making ornaments and making garlands and keeping things clean and fetching their water. And one of the big services was preparing leaves for writing, because that was a system. They didn't have paper so readily available. There's this nice description. Later on, when Jiva was well established, he was invited by one Mughal ruler to be engaged in a discussion on the topic of which is greater, the Ganga or the Jamuna. And after a long discussion, Jiva Goswami convinced everybody the Jamuna is greater, because the Ganga touches the feet of the Supreme Lord, but the Jamuna is the Lord's consort. And so everyone was satisfied, and the Muslim ruler said, I want to give you some gift, please, you name it, what would you like? And it is said, Jiva Goswami said some writing paper. And specifically, Chinese writing paper. China was good at exports already. And so that gift was made from the Muslim ruler. So he was doing menial services. Rupa Goswami then gave him Diksha. And part of the next service was proofreading their writings, because that was one of their assignments from Lord Chaitanya. So he would proofread, and in his proofreading he would make commentaries, and they would approve those commentaries before they became circulated. So he is getting all this training directly from Rupa and Sanatana Goswami to, in fact, become the next Acharya. And that's exactly what happened. In course of time, the three illustrated in this painting, Srinivasa Acharya is on the far left, and Narottam Das Thakur and Dukhi Krishna became Shamananda. Those three became students in his school, and he trained them thoroughly in all of the Goswami teachings, his own Sandarbhas, and so forth and so on. Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, they were highly capable students, and they were proficiently trained. And then came the celebrated event of sending them off for book distribution. We'll hear about that. No, we did already hear about that from Srinivasa Acharya and Shamananda and King Virhambir, and the books being kidnapped and all of that. But Jiva Goswami was behind it, and they were keeping him informed as they were going here and there. In the Jiva Institute, here's some copies of Jiva Goswami's handwriting preserved. At the Radha Damodar temple, here's the place where his samadhi is kept. Here's the room inside those closed doors. Here's the courtyard that's usually filled with lots of pilgrims, but this is at a time when it was quiet. This is the temple, the Radha Damodar temple. Here is the full set of deities. Remember those 4 sets of deities? And the deities on the far left, they're really big. And then going across 4 sets of Radha Krishna deities, which tells us something. These Vaishnavas considered Rupa as being very qualified in deity worship. It's said in some places that when Jiva Goswami was engaged in his worship of Radha Damodar, it was very intimate, as was his worship of his Krishna Balaram deities when he was young. So much so that Jiva Goswami would sing and Krishna would play his flute and Krishna would dance. Very, very personal. And that little platform in the front, that's where the Govardhan Shila that was given to Sanatan Goswami by Gopal himself or Govinda himself, placing his feet in this Shalagram Shila instead of Sanatan Goswami was so old, circumambulating around Govardhan Hill, and it was difficult for him. So that's the altar one more time. Jiva Goswami's contribution, his absorption in Krishna Bhakti, and his protection of the teachings and propagation of the teachings of Krishna Bhakti, given from Lord Chaitanya through his 2 uncles, and passed on to the next generation and distributed widely. Very, very, very powerful, empowered Acharya. So that's Jiva Goswami. And here we're having a nice look in the background. That's, of course, Govardhan Hill. And we're overlooking what may have been Radhakund and Shyamakund from Govardhan Hill. Now we're back heading to the next place. You see that red line that's leaving the temple of Radha Damodar, going to the temple of Radha Gopinath. That's what the letters you see on the screen there. And then protruding out into Radhakund is the sitting place of Janava, called Janava Baitak. And in that little square there in the corner is the Samadhi Mandir of Raghunath Das Goswami. So here is the temple of the entrance to the temple of Radha Gopinath. That's Janava Devi, where it's said when she was married to Lord Nityananda, she had never visited Vrindavan. But when after Nityananda's departure, she came to Vrindavan. We'll hear some more about her travels. When she came to Vrindavan, she came to this area. Of course, there was no building like this. But when she came to the area where the deities are now, she said, "This is the place of Gopinath. A temple for Gopinath should be established." So on the left, that's where the temple is. It's not a large structure. And in the picture on the right, that's the deities, Radha Gopinath and Ananga Manjari. Ananga Manjari, it is said in Gaura Gonadesh Dipika that's Janava, is Ananga Manjari. And here's a close-up picture of the Gopinath deity. Now, if you go in the temple and go back in the far corner, you'll find a little path that takes you out to the sitting place. That's the sitting place of Janava. We'll go back. The tree is, depending upon the season, it gave shade to Janava. And when there wasn't shade, there was a little sitting place where she could sit and chant. And then to the right, or behind that, is a little private area where she could go down and down and down and bathe in Radhakund in privacy. Oops, you can't see that yet. That's over here. And here it is on the season where it's rainy, the water level is up, the foliage of the tree is substantial. And to get to this, one can go there. To get there, you have to go through this doorway, and this doorway leads into the temple of Gopinath. And then you keep going over to the side, and you'll find the samadhi of Raghunath Das Goswami. We'll see that shortly. It is said when Janava was sitting here chanting, she would have transcendental visions. One of those transcendental visions is depicted in this painting. She saw a bridge going across Radhakund, and on the bridge were the gopis, and on a swing was Radha and Krishna, and they were enjoying their loving pastimes. And when she came back inside after these experiences, she shared with people what she saw. And anytime I've been there, I've never seen a bridge going across Radhakund. So, but you know, the pastimes of Krishna become revealed to elevated personalities, if, you know, according to the Lord's desire and their relationship with Him. Yeah, I skipped something that's important for Rupa Goswami's life. I'm going to go back. Excuse me, Jiva Goswami's life. Before we get to Janava, just go back to Jiva. When he was engaged in service of Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami in their proofreading their books and so forth, there was a traveling pundit named Rup Narayan. And Rup Narayan was one of these Digvijay fellows that would go and challenge, because that was a thing that scholars would sometimes do. So he came to Vrindavan, and when he came to Vrindavan, he heard that the two most eminent scholars in Vrindavan were Sanatan and Rupa. And so he went and challenged them and said, I want to challenge you in debate. And they said, oh, you're so elevated, we're no match for you. So he then requested that they sign something saying they've been defeated. So both Sanatan and Rupa signed a thing saying they've been defeated. And then he traveled further in Vrindavan and heard that Jiva Goswami is also, you know, credited scholar. So he wanted to challenge Jiva Goswami and showed him, you know, your two uncles have already been defeated by me. So Jiva Goswami purposefully wanted to defend the honor of Rupa and Sanatan, because this man was going around saying he defeated them. So he said, I accept your challenge. So along the banks of the Jamuna for 7 days, they had debates, and Rup Narayan was defeated. So the history goes, he went back to Rupa and Sanatan to let them know the good news, that their honor had been revived or restored by his defeating Rup Narayan. And Rupa Goswami took exception to his engaging in wrangling debate with a materialistic scholar, and said, this isn't the mentality of a Vaishnav, and Vrindavan is meant for Vaishnavas, so you should leave Vrindavan. So hurt, Jiva Goswami left Vrindavan. And where he went was outside of Vrindavan, in the direction of Mathura, and he was residing, the description goes, he was residing in a cave that had been previously occupied by an alligator. A little tiny cave. And he didn't have any food. It's said that he lived for some period of time just eating uncooked flour soaked in water. That was his program. And he became quite ill and became lean and thin. And it was the practice of Sanatana Goswami, as he previously was prime minister. He had a similar kind of profile in Vrindavan. He would travel from place to place and village to village and give guidance to everybody and console everybody. And, he was their spiritual leader and spiritual guide. So as he was traveling near Mathura, he heard about one sadhu that's living in an alligator cave and, in undergoing great austerities. And the people there were concerned about his welfare. And so Sanatana Goswami went. He intuitively understood this is where Jiva, because he was just missing. And he found him. And the description is, he was so weak and thin that he couldn't move, and that the cave in which he was living was so tight to get in and out. Sanatana Goswami had to personally pick him up and carry him back to Vrindavan. And there's different versions of the exchange with Rupa Goswami, but one version said that he had Jiva Goswami nearby, and he came to Rupa Goswami and said, I have a question for you on our philosophy, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. What's that? What's the greatest quality of a Vaishnav? And Rupa Goswami said, Jivadaya, mercy to a jiva. And Sanatana Goswami said, very good. Here's one jiva. Show him your mercy. And there's discussion about why did Rupa Goswami do like that? Why did he put Jiva Goswami in such distress? Kicked out of Vrindavan. And there are worldly people that say because he was proud. And there's transcendental people that say not because he was proud, but he wanted to strengthen his unconditional dependence upon the mercy of Guru. And so Rupa Goswami did like that, because the intention of Jiva was not pride, let me defeat this fellow, but it was honoring his Guru and his Guru's elder brother, who Rupa looked and spoke of as his Guru, Sanatana Goswami. So it was for their honor. It wasn't something personal or selfish. Anyway, that was an important incident in Jiva Goswami's life. there's something that's a little delicate to discuss, but the delicate one is, during Rupa Goswami's time, and subsequently and currently, there was a hot topic amongst the sadhus in Vrindavan, and that was, we discussed this previously, the relationship between Krishna and Radha as being outside of marriage. Parakiya, it's called. Unwed relationship between male and female. And Swakiya is married. So there's some sadhus that didn't like the Parakiya. So Jiva understanding. And there are different ways of describing how this went, but one of the ways of describing is respectful of that concern of some sadhus. In one of his primary writings, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami didn't touch that topic much, but he wrote a separate book on Ujjvala Nilamani, which he did. When we discussed Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he made a commentary on Ujjvala Nilamani and cited a particular verse and expansively discussed that particular verse, which explained that the Parakiya rasa is the right understanding, and should not be seen through the lens of mundane morality. And we discussed this already. Jiva Goswami, being a follower of his spiritual master, Rupa Goswami, wrote in Gopal Champu, which is Krishna's visit to Vrindavan after killing Dantavakra. Krishna spent 2 months in Vrindavan with the Brijbasis. And in that Gopal Champu, towards the end, Krishna marries Radha. Bhaktisiddhanta writes, it's not possible. Don't make the mistake of thinking that Jiva Goswami could write something contrary to Rupa Goswami. Not possible. So one must understand that expression in Gopal Champu in a different way. And then goes on to describe how one can... He was being sensitive to the sadhus in Vrindavan of the time, that this was a big issue for them. So I hope I'm not. I don't want to open the door for discussion on that, because it's very delicate, and there are different ways of looking at things that are delicate. So let's not go further with that. I mentioned in relation to Janavas and Jiva Goswami, when Janava visited Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami was the first to receive her. And that part of his character and quality and position was he was very gracious. So he was the leading personality. Rupa and Sanatan had already departed when she came. So he was the primary one receiving her. And then later, after she left, she wrote a letter, a long description of circumstances, because she was traveling about. And she saw the circumstances of how the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and then in turn the teachings of the Goswamis, was lacking. And people were not getting proper guidance from those teachings. Could he possibly, so she wanted him to make arrangements for the writings of the Goswamis to be made available outside of Vrindavan. And so he did. I mean, how Krishna inspired him within the heart, and how much connection that had with how Krishna inspired Janava in her heart, who can say? But she had a role to play, is the point, in this proliferation of because she was doing it herself, but then, books are needed, writings and teachings that can be copied and made available at least to learned people who can then teach the others. That was part of the idea. So let's go back to Janava and her relationship with Gopinath, because Janava, is a lover of Gopinath, because in her spiritual identity, she's an Angamanjari, a lover of Gopinath. Janava was one of two wives of Lord Nityananda, just as Balaram had two wives, Revati and Varuni were the two wives of Balaram. So Lord Nityananda had two wives. They were daughters of Suryadas. And Suryadas had been given a title, Sarakale. Sarakale is one of those titles for someone who is a well-accomplished person. So it's an interesting detail. Suryadas had a number of brothers and sisters, and one of his brothers was Gauridas. We heard about Gauridas, Ambika Kalna, and the deities in Ambika Kalna. They were brothers. Suryadas lived in one place, not far from where Gauridas was, because the marriage of Nityananda and his two wives took place in Ambika Kalna. The marriage place is, it's a very special place. It's a sacred place in the back area of Gauridas Pandit's temple in Ambika Kalna. So they're brothers, and thus, related in service as servants of Lord Chaitanya. So Suryadas had two daughters, Janava and Vasudha. And when Lord Nityananda was in Puri, Lord Chaitanya requested him, or instructed him, I want you to become married. And so he accepted. He was a little flustered, but he accepted. That's what Lord Chaitanya wants. And as he was traveling about, Suryadas, having two daughters and having great faith in Lord Nityananda, a matchmaker person approached him and said, what do you think? You know how that goes. Your two daughters, Nityananda, what do you think? And he had great faith in Lord Nityananda, but he's an Avaduta. How's he going to maintain a wife? What to speak of two? So he was a little, he didn't give an immediate reply. And I forget exactly what happened. Some inauspicious thing happened. His daughters became very ill or something like that. And no doctor could cure them. And someone said, it's because you're hesitating to have them married to you. It's an offense to Lord Nityananda. And he accepted. Then there's this very interesting story. It's one of those common stories that you don't find in biographies so much. But the marriage was to be with Janava. And when they're sitting down to have prasadam, and Vasudha is distributing prasadam, you've heard this story before. She's distributing the prasadam, and the sari on top of her head started to slip, so she manifested two more arms to fix her sari. And Lord Nityananda said, I want to marry her too. So it was a dual marriage. A big event in the Gaudiya Vaishnava community. And they spent some time, let's see here. Yeah. Surya Das, this is from Bhakti Ratnakar. Surya Das Pandit, because Gauridas Pandit and Surya Das Pandit, whose is actually their name or title, held an important post in the service of the king, as a result of which he was given the title Sarakale, which means commander, and he earned a large sum of money. Surya Das and his brothers were all very pure in their character, and they had a spotless reputation. His virtues are innumerable. His daughters were Vasudha and Janava. Yeah. So, again from Bhakti Ratnakar. In a dream, Surya Das had a vision of Nityananda as Balaram, with Vasudha and Janava standing to his left and right side in the forms of Revati and Varuni. When Surya Das offered the two girls to Nityananda's lotus feet, Nityananda Prabhu mercifully gave him the same vision directly. Surya Das fainted in ecstasy. So after their wedding, they went to visit Mother Sachi, and Mother Sachi requested that they visit Shantipur, where Advaitacharya was, and then from Shantipur they went to Saptagram. Saptagram is a place where Udarana Datta resided. Udarana Datta was part of the traveling party that Lord Chaitanya sent for preaching in Bengal. And then they established a permanent place in Kardaha on the bank of the Ganges. Janava had no children, but Vasudha had two. One was a son. His name was Virabhadra, Janava's son, and Ganga Devi was their daughter. Now, in Gora Gonadesh Dipika, it says that Virabhadra was Chiradakshay Vishnu and Ganga was Ganga, respectively. And Ganga was married to Madhava Acharya, who is an incarnation of Santanu. Santanu, Ganga, right? So although Janava was not the mother of Virabhadra, Virabhadra had the deepest regard. Virabhadra became a Diksha disciple of Janava. Yeah. Here's Bhaktivinoda Thakur writing a prayer to Janava. O Janava Devi, be merciful to this servant today. Deliver me from my pain and give me a place in the boat of your lotus feet so that I may be sure to cross over the ocean of birth and death. You are Nityananda's energy. your devotion to Krishna and my Guru. Please give this servant the desired tree of your lotus feet. How numerous are the fallen souls that you have saved. So this fallen beggar seeks a place at your feet. Now, her life, what we know about her life is largely found in Bhakti Ratnakar. And one of there's several sections in Bhakti Ratnakar. One of them is very lengthy. One of the main messages is her role in this first Gaur Purnima festival at Kituri. She was invited, and when she came, everyone honored her because she's the wife of Lord Nityananda. And they're all devotees of Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda. So she's in this special revered role. Rightly so. And so, but she had a service mood. She didn't just like have a celebrity mood. She was in the kitchen and making all the arrangements in the kitchen. Srinivasacharya did the deity installation, but it was all supervised by Janava. He had a very prominent role. Yeah. There's a description in Bhakti Ratnakar of that festival and her function. I'm going to read. Janava Devi's travels are described. So after the Kituri festival, she traveled. She didn't have a chance to see many holy places, so she went. From Kituri, she went to Vrindavan. On her way to Vrindavan, she stopped in a prosperous village where she delivered some atheistic non-believers and criminals and bestowed Krishna Prema upon them. When she arrived in Vrindavan, she saw the samadhi of Gauridas Pandit. Now, Gauridas Pandit is her father's brother or uncle. Gauridas Pandit had his samadhi in Vrindavan, and she was moved to tears. She was greeted when she reached Vrindavan by Jiva Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Lokanath Goswami, Bogarga Goswami, Madhu Pandit, etc. All came to offer their respectful greetings. Taking these leaders with her, she visited the principal temples of Vrindavan, Madan Mohan, Govinda, and Gopinath before going to Radhakund. There she met Raghunath Das Goswami, who was engaged in constant chanting of the holy names and whose body was emaciated by his austerities. She's at Radhakund. She's sitting at that sitting place. She's hearing Krishna's flute. She's seeing this image that you see on the screen here, a bridge going across Radhakund, etc., etc. And then with the other Vaishnavas, after visiting the main temples and Radhakund, they went with her to visit all the places in Vrindavan. It's written that during this parikrama around Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami is reciting and describing Brihat Bhagavatamrita. Brihat Bhagavatamrita is one of the books of Sanatana Goswami, which Sanatana Goswami had requested Jiva Goswami to proofread. And now he's explaining it. After her visit to Braj, Janava returned to Gauda Desh, that's, the Bengal area, where she visited numerous villages. She spent some days in Kituri, again, some days in Budhuri, that's the home of Ramchandra Kaviraj. She spent time in Ekachakra, that's a very celebrated visit. She went to Katwa, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, and there she met Yadu Nandan Acharya. She went to Yajigram, and by the way, I've added a whole section to yesterday's presentation on Yajigram. It's a very special place. So she went there. That's Srinivasacharya's home. She went to Sri Khanda, another very nice place, not so far from Yajigram, where Raghuvanandan Thakur and Narahari Sarkar lived. Sri Khanda. She went to Navadvip. She went to Ambika Kalna. She went to Saptagram, same place where Udaran Datta lived. And then she returned to Kardaha. All this is in Bhakti Ratnakar, just describing her travels. And then she narrated everything to her sister, Vasudha, and her sister's son and her disciple Virabhadra. Then comes some nice details. Here's a photograph of Radha Govinda. Janava was instrumental in placing Radha next to Govinda. You know that story? Don't know that story. The deities that Rupa Goswami established, the principal deities, Madan Mohan, Govindaji, and Gopinath, they did not have Radha by their side. So the king of Puri, Prataparudra, had a son. And his son's name, I forget. Does anybody remember his son's name? The son had an inspiration. He wanted to provide deities of Radha for both Govindaji and Madan Mohan. So an arrangement was made by the new king, whose name I can't remember. And the deities were sent to Vrindavan, and a plan was made for their combined installation. And the evening of the installation, Janava saw them and thought, this isn't right. This Radha is too short to be by the side of Govinda. That evening, the pujari at Madan Mohan had a dream, and it was confirmed in his dream. Radha said, I'm not Radha, I'm Lalita. Put me by the side of Madan Mohan. So in the deity of Madan Mohan have Radha, Madan Mohan, and Lalita. That's the deity of Sanatana Goswami. That's no longer in Vrindavan, but it's the original deity of Madan Mohan have that set of deities. So that it was changed last minute. The installation was of Lalita and Radha. So that left Govinda without Radha. So after some time, Janava was visiting in Puri, and she saw this deity of Lakshmi around the side of the temple. And this is a long story, but it's not that deity, it's not Lakshmi, it wasn't Lakshmi, it was Radha. And Janava understood that, however she understood that. And that when she saw, this is Radha. That evening, the king had a dream in which the deity of Lakshmi said, I'm not Lakshmi, I'm Radha. I want to be by the side of Govinda. So Janava, smiled. She understood. And so a big arrangement was made. I mean, there's some history. The deity, before being placed in the Jagannath temple, was worshipped by a pujari in South India somewhere, that he knew it was Radharani, but he had no children, so the king went to his funeral and brought the deity back and placed it in the temple, but over the years, Radha became Lakshmi. But then Lakshmi became Radha again. So on an elephant procession all the way from Puri to Vrindavan is a big deal. And Radha was installed by the side of Govinda, and Janava had her role to play. And there was a similar arrangement, the details of which I don't know, for Radha to be down by the side of Gopinath. So Janava's role in our disciplic line is fantastic, and we're running out of, we're way past time already, 10 after 9. So we'll continue tomorrow with the Bhajan Kutir of Raghunath Das Goswami. Not tomorrow, the next time I'm doing this. Huh? It's not in the schedule. It's not in the schedule. Huh? I'm thinking, what? We'll go offline. Whenever that is.